who aren't able to join us live can join us or watch the recording later on. Welcome everyone to today's Survivor Circle session. My name is Becky Perkins. I'm the Survivor Support Specialist with Survivor Space, which is an initiative of Zero Abuse Project. And before I forget, because I usually do, I want to acknowledge our funders. Survivor Space is possible thanks to federal funding through the Office for Victims of Crime. So we are grateful for that funding. Just a little note about how to participate today. So once our presenters get started, you will be able to type into the chat on Zoom if you have a question or a comment about anything at any point during the presentation today. Your camera and your audio are disabled, so you will not be able to show yourself or to ask a question verbally, but please do utilize that chat function. And when you do use the chat, you have the option of asking a question just to the panelist, to me as a host, or to everyone. So be mindful of that, depending on who you want to see the question or the comment. So without further ado, I am incredibly happy to welcome back three of our amazing Survivor Space subject matter experts and past presenters, future presenters of Survivor Circles, Melanie Sachs-Barton, Angie Kahn, and Dr. Sarah Helms, they're all gonna lead us through a great discussion about the holidays and how they affect all of us in a myriad of different ways. So welcome to all of you, and I'm looking forward to this.
Thanks, Becky. Welcome, everyone. I'm Angie Kahn, and I'm just so excited about doing the Survivor Circle. The holidays for me in the past have been very just up and down, and sometimes I would get really confused on like why around October 1st to January 2nd I would have this existential dread. Like even when my life felt like it was going the way it was supposed to go or smoothly, it just never failed. It was every year. And I started to think, I know I'm not the only one that feels this way. And I also want to recognize and honor that there are those that have survived CSA as well, that around this time of year, maybe it's a year that they get excited about celebrating and have joy in their life. And I want to recognize that there is no right or wrong way to go into the holidays if you are a survivor of CSA. However you come into the holidays is okay and is welcomed. And so today we're going to talk kind of about a lot of different topics about what might come up for people. And if what we talk about, if that doesn't relate to you, please feel free to send us a question or a chat. Maybe we just have kind of left that off, or so we really want to be honoring of how everyone that has survived CSA comes into the holidays and how it might feel for them. Later, when I learned about that, I realized it was kind of like a trauma-versary for me. And there were a lot of things that happened between those months across my life span that, of course, would make me feel like that around that time. But I didn't understand early on the correlation between the way that our body holds on to trauma and that visceral recall. And so I'm just really excited to have a conversation with Melanie and with Sarah today and with you all about this topic. I think it's needed. So, yeah.
I was really excited and honored to get to be a part of this with two other awesome SMEs who I always love working with. I think for me as a therapist, the expectations, the pressure, the family dynamics, the boundaries, like there's so many different therapeutic pieces that come in around the holidays. So thinking about how to bring that into this 1 hour discussion. There are so many different directions, as Angie said, because everyone's coming to this from their own space. So some people are coming from a space of the complexities of navigating their families of origin. Some people are coming with the complexities of navigating new relationships with partners or with their own children or with family who they're choosing to bring in at this time of year. There's just so many different ways that it can look. But across the board, I think the commonality is that there are always complexities. There are always trade-offs. The holidays are very representational. So what I mean by that is that they represent things that are bigger or more existential, or there's layers behind. So a lot of times in therapy, that representation kind of digging under the surface to say, okay, well, maybe on the surface, this was just a dinner or a party or decorating the tree or lighting a candle or whatever sort of symbolic holiday event. But maybe underneath that, there are layers of what that represents to you. Maybe what it has represented in the past to you, or maybe what you hoped that it could represent, but it didn't feel connected in your body or in your spirit. So I think as we navigate the discussion today, that's going to be a big lens that I'm bringing, is just kind of thinking through what are all the different ways that this can look? What are the different values that are kind of underneath the surface? What kinds of triggers may be starting to bubble up? And then what do we do with all that? How do we navigate it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm excited. I think about this topic a lot. Back when I first started my healing journey as a survivor, I didn't really know where I fit in this discussion because I was just doing things the way that they had always been done. And so as I've grown on my healing journey, it's really been powerful to kind of take the reins on some of that and set those boundaries and find freedom in that, and find more joy in that. But also honoring, the difficult times and pieces of the holidays through the years. I think those things we're talking about can coexist, and that's okay. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I really want to focus on, is that those things can coexist. And whatever your journey is your journey. And, we want to hear from you too. So we're starting this conversation kind of based on each of our individual kind of passions for this topic and our experiences. But we want to start right off the bat hearing from you. So in the chat, if you could just let us know some things you want to touch on, whether it be just like a simple word like boundaries, or more elaborating on like, this is what's going on, and like, have any of you dealt with this, and how to handle certain situations. We'll do our best, and we'll be honest if we haven't, but we'll do our best to kind of touch on things that are put in the chat throughout the conversation. We know we're not face to face with you, which we could be, because then we could have more of a face to face conversation, but we want to treat this like that because we all come at it from different places. And so I think our wisdom is just as much, your wisdom is just as much as valuable as our wisdom. And so, or even just sharing things that you've learned along the way in the chat, just to keep the conversation going among all of us. And yeah, I've heard about this topic in many different arenas. One of my favorite ones is another survivor activist, Nicole Braddock Bromley, always has this on the forefront of her interaction on her social media. She's written a couple books, and she always has like a survivor drop-in night where survivors can drop in and just sit with each other about this topic. And she just did that recently, within her like e-course and things like that. And so I just think this conversation is so important for us to kind of show up for each other, with each other, in solidarity in different things, because it is hard to set boundaries, or it's hard to kind of break the mold of what's supposed to be done, or what you've always done, in the name of your own sanity or your own healing. And, as we go, I'm sure we'll each give specific examples on how we've done that. I know I've done a big step in that this year for myself on my healing journey. So I'm excited to talk about that and what that has looked like, and how it has freed me from thinking I had to do things the way that they were always done. And so we'll open up the conversation, definitely start typing things in the the chat if you can and want to. And we're just excited to be here all together. It's an honor to be here side by Angie and Sarah and Becky and everybody else who's watching. We're just honored to be here sitting with you about this topic.
Yeah, Melanie, I'm so glad that you recognized and brought that forward of sometimes we're kind of in that mode. I found myself, and I realized after you said it, I'm like, yeah, because I had always done things a certain way, because there were always those expectations that this is how we do it. And especially with my family of origin, which is really tricky, as I realized, like, I really need some boundaries. And I'm speaking just for myself. Some of you can relate, some of you may not, and it's okay. But for myself, I realized that it was not healthy for me. And that's why sometimes I would go into, some spirals afterwards, and I call them just those downward, just not wanting to isolate, because I was forcing my body and my mind to show up in spaces where I didn't feel safe, because that was what was expected of me. And so I also follow a survivor. His name is Nate P. I can't pronounce his last name, so I won't even try to pronounce his last name, but he had also a time where survivors can just pop on and we can talk, and we can just kind of, or sit with one another. And I think there's almost I don't think, but I know that there's this beauty to when survivors can come into the space and just be, right, without those expectations. And it kind of just gives that decompression chamber, that time to exhale. Some of us may be leaving origins of faith. There may be a lot of spiritual confusion around this time of year as well for some of us. And so there's all of those, like both of you said, those layers. And so, for me, one of the things that I started doing on my journey was really tending to and taking care of my inner child. And that was a really important part of my healing. And it still is a very important part of my healing. And so I think prior, a lot of things that I would try to do is just push through, I'll deal with it later, just push through, I'll deal with it later. And now recognizing, like, oh, wait a second, like, I'm starting to feel like my heart's racing, or my palms are sweating, like paying attention to my body, because I can recognize my triggers more, because I'm intentional with them today, instead of kind of pushing through them and dealing with them later. So it might be that maybe I'm going somewhere and I've put a boundary on, I'm going to go to this place for 2 hours. That's the amount of time that I'm going to spend there. And notice that I'm getting kind of nervous, and so I will take a moment before I walk in, or even if I might walk to the bathroom and just ground myself. I put my hand on my heart, and I might say to that inner child, that little girl, like, little Angie, like, we are good. I've got you. And if at any time that you don't feel honored, we can leave. We don't have to stay here for the whole 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And it's really been, I found just some beauty and some freedom in that as well. And honoring that space as well. So,
yeah, I love that, Angie, because I've started to do something similar, but also different. We each have our own journey. And for me, I kind of stepped into faith on my healing journey. So a lot of people kind of maybe have walked away from faith on their healing journey. Faith has been very healing for me. And so my family of origin does not have that same kind of trajectory. So I've kind of chosen to spend holidays. I'm married now, and I have tomorrow she'll be 6 months old, my daughter. And things really change when you become a parent, but they started to change a little bit before that, when I was starting to get married and kind of assimilating into my husband's family, and things like that started to change. And I started to recognize that the dynamics on both sides did not work well when they were together. And so I've kind of set, parameters around things like, okay, we're going to go to my family instead of having everybody come here, which is chaotic and hard for me for multiple reasons. I'm not going to get into detail, but so this year we're actually going to my parents in New Hampshire, so that I can protect the joy around that, and so it's going to be one overnight, and it's going to be a joyful time. And if it's difficult at times, I'm there for a night, and it's a protected space, like you're talking about, Angie, that 2 hours or whatever you have to do. And I think for years I thought I had to go back to my hometown with all my family who didn't believe the things I believe, and I had to do all the things. And I do miss, some of those, my cousins and pieces like that. But I can protect the joy in those spaces. But also knowing it's okay to make decisions that are good for my mental health and my family and my daughter, my baby girl. I don't want to bring her into that chaos because it just should be that way. And so it's like being able to, and being okay with it, and explaining those boundaries, in a way that serves me well, but also lets people know that's where I'm at, and
Yeah.
it sometimes has to be firm, and it sometimes may hurt people, but not with, I tried to give it gently, but just being like, this is what I'm doing, and like, you can have me for that time or not, like. And so I think that's
Yeah.
been really powerful for me this year. Like, we're staying on where I live on Cape Cod for Christmas, and then we're going to see my parents the week before Christmas with just my husband and my daughter, and not everybody is, and so it just feels like I feel so much freedom in that, because like I made that decision, and it's empowering, and it's something I just thought I had to do for years, and I don't. And I can teach my daughter that she can have a voice and things like that too. And so, that's what it's been for me kind of more recently, but it's been a growing process through the years. I started with Thanksgiving. So for years, Thanksgiving, I now stay here. That's been going on for 4 or 5 years now. But I haven't gone home for Thanksgiving in 4 or 5 years. But Christmas is a big one, because it's like the way things always should have been, and so so it's really empowering, to be able to kind of set the stage and like feel peace about it, and enjoy those little moments. Like, yes, we're only going for a night, but we're going to have a better night than we would have had if I tried to force the other stuff,
Right.
And so I think it's just super empowering, especially as a survivor, and having a voice for my own family now, with my husband and with my daughter, and kind of the new family unit that we have, So.
I love that you said empowering, because that is exactly the word that was on my heart with just listening to you speak. Like, it is so empowering to be intentional, to really sit with it and grapple with it, and maybe try some different things out and see what works and what doesn't. But in the end, to get to that point where you feel like I am centered, I am aligned with, with what I value, with what's important to me, with my boundaries, like I am solid right now, and I'm going to intentionally step out with this plan for how these next few days or hours or interactions, or how this is going to look. And I can create that space thoughtfully and intentionally, and that's so empowering to be able to reclaim some of that, especially for folks who may be doing that with people who are triggering, whether that be family of origin, or in your workplace, or in friendships, wherever that is. To know that you have the power to set those boundaries, to hold those boundaries, to leave if they aren't being honored and respected. That's hugely empowering.
Absolutely. And we had someone say in the chat, it's amazing how bringing a child into the world gives us the ability to search out safety in our families and develop different ways of doing things. So we keep the good and don't pass on the bad. Yay, Melanie. So
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's like changing tradition. Like, tradition can look different. Like, you can start new traditions, and that's what I'm excited for, is like, now that I've kind of set the stage of like what traditionally didn't actually work for me that I thought I had to do, now I can create new beautiful traditions. Like, we can get excited every year to go to New Hampshire. Like, I haven't been back to New Hampshire in years for holidays, so like that can be a new thing that like I always used to do, but we can do it in a different way, and
Yeah.
so really like celebrating those wins of like, we can still do that thing, it just can look different, and maybe it's less time, maybe it's a different time, maybe it's whatever it looks like, and so it's an exciting thing to finally get to that place of like, this is my oyster. I can do whatever I want here. And
it's really about rewriting your narrative, right, Melanie? Like, you're rewriting your narrative. You're taking something that once held maybe some anxiety or some things inside that just didn't feel right for you. And I'm doing the same for me. And those of you out there may be doing the same thing and saying, wait a second, like, how can I rewrite this in a way that honors me, that honors my family? You know, I have 3 kids, but they're all adults now. And so that's a whole different approach now to the holidays. So I have a 28-year-old and a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, and it's all different. You know, for Thanksgiving and the holidays, my 18-year-old, you know, we wanted to get away and just do something for our family unit. And my 18-year-old just didn't, was going through some things and was working, and it just didn't feel like that was what he wanted to do. And so he said, I don't think I have capacity. And for him to speak up for himself, and I really wanted to spend that time with him. But holding those 2 things, like we talked about earlier, those 2 things that can exist on, I've taught him to really be in tune with all of my kids, with what does feel comfortable for you, what is okay for you, and him knowing that he needed that space in that couple of days. You know, although I was sad as a mom, I was excited too, because that shows me that, like, what I'm doing is working with my kids. They don't have to feel the things that I felt around this time of year. So it was a beautiful, bittersweet learning experience for me on this side of the healing too.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about breaking some of those generational curses and some of that generational trauma, you know, obviously we're talking in some lenses about how we set boundaries with our families of origin, or with, you know, with folks where we're the ones who are sort of setting limits to others. But being able to receive that from someone else is also a huge part of that growth process, and of changing the narrative, where the value of the holiday is not in white knuckling our way through it because this is the way it's supposed to be. Like, that's not clearly the purpose. So allowing people to be right where they are and get their needs met, and knowing that that's not personal, not taking it as an affront, but being able to navigate that. That's such a beautiful beautiful new holiday tradition, you know, to be able to shift the expectation to we get our needs met at the holidays, instead of it's my job, I owe it to my family, I have to do this way. It's huge.
And he learned that because he watched me in the last couple of years do that. And so I knew, like, that was that bittersweet pang of, like, I taught him this by modeling it, right? And that's, yeah. And so although it was exciting, it was a little, you know, but I think in that also, you know, knowing that we're maybe in different seasons and different years, might be some years that we might be excited and have joy, and then the next year it might not be that way, and giving ourselves room to be, I think, to be okay with this year, however it shows up. Walking through that, maybe even starting new traditions, maybe even start doing things that maybe you've always wanted to do, but have never ventured there. You know, starting something that is totally opposite of what you have done, just because you're wanting to make some new memories or rewrite a narrative around this time of year for yourself, is a beautiful thing as well.
The beautiful thing is it's always changing. And I think Wendy just wrote in the comments, you know, being able to, like, one year it's just you and your 2 presents in the woods that you gave yourself, and then the next year it could be with 15 members of your husband's family. And I think that's a beautiful example of, like, some years it looks a certain way and other years it looks this way, and then you can go back to that 2 presents in the woods, and then you can go back to that 15 people with everybody there, you know. And I think that's the beautiful thing about finding freedom. Like, it doesn't have to be the same exact thing year after year. It can always change, and your family unit, your life circumstance, your relationships, that all plays into that. And I think if we just take wisdom from those who've done it before us, and those who will do it after us, and what we've learned in the process. I think, it can spark your imagination of like, whoa, I can like go away with my family. Like, I was really inspired, Angie, by you talking about like, we just wanted to go away. Like, we didn't want to like sit home and do the usual thing. And I think that's exciting for me to think about for my family. Like, maybe one year we'll just travel somewhere, and so thinking about like, I didn't even honestly think of that till you said you were doing that, like it's like something that I have the freedom to do, but I didn't think about it until you said like, we just want to go somewhere, and I was like, oh, that would be really cool one year to not just like do the usual thing at home and just like pack up and go travel somewhere, so I think we can find freedom in each other's experiences to either mirror what we've heard or make it our own.
Yeah, for sure. I love that Wendy went out into the woods, and I'm a backpacker, so I'm like, oh. And so just like Melanie, you're like, oh, I didn't think about traveling. I'm like, I didn't think about maybe one year I will get my backpack together and head out into the woods. Like, that's the beauty of having this space and these circles, is it is really like learning from one another and leaning into one another's victories and joys and things that they're learning, and then also like supporting and holding one another, sacred space for one another, and the pain of it or the things that come about for each person. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the holidays, more so than any other time, it's like there's this weird dynamic or pressure about it where we think, okay, well, every year I've got to outdo myself. Okay, well, if I did that this year, then next year it's got to be, bigger and better and flashier and whatever the thing is. When in reality, like, where does that come from other than just, commercialism and just what we're sort of surrounded with in society? But when you really start drilling down into, well, what are the values of this? What is the purpose? What need am I trying to meet with this kind of exercise? And if the need is to be with family, or if the need is to be authentic, or if the value is whatever that is for you, there are an infinite number of ways that you can live that out with your behavior that don't have to just always look the same. So, if you're valuing connection, then you may be able to find new and different people to connect with, or you may find different ways of showing that connection on the outside to mirror what you're feeling on the inside. I think it's interesting to kind of think about that shift of, it doesn't always have to be the same or bigger or better mentality, but really, how could I downsize this? How could I just make it look completely different this year? And it's not precedent setting. Next year I can do it the same or different, or there's freedom in that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, Sarah, because when my kids were little, I wanted that picture perfect holiday season. I wanted everybody I would buy the outfits for everybody. I would want the pictures for everybody. And anybody that knows our family personally, we are a very neurodivergent family. Everyone is neurospicy in my family right here, my family that I've built. And it doesn't ever look like that. I've got a child that doesn't ever want to have their picture taken, and I would always feel that. And I think it was because, looking back in hindsight, if I could have that, then that meant I was okay. And that meant like we were it's good. But and also that comparison really early on as a young mom, trying to start a family and find my way, like, we do a lot of comparison. And social media is a bad place for that too. And so giving yourself permission to that pressure, that expectation, that comparison of wanting that picture perfect. And doing that deep dive. So I have to do that deep dive. And why am I stressing myself and my kids and my husband out? What is the purpose? What is that need? Getting curious instead of judgmental about what is the need that I really do have inside? What is the drive behind this? And then being able to sit with that. And I think it was you know, for me, it was that younger version of myself that didn't have that, looking back, that wanted to make it, but make it in a way that it was not in a healthy way. And so also giving compassion that, okay, I've recognized that this isn't the thing for us. And then how can we move forward from here instead of just, you know, feeling guilty or bad or, you know, like I failed again. Right. So it's a very like fluid space, or it should be, but sometimes it can feel very just that pressure as well.
Yeah. Brooks asked a great question in the chat just now, saying you're interested in hearing thoughts about honoring your own desires while also trying to honor family, which are not always in alignment, which feels like a lot of gray area. And you know, for me, like the gray area, I think that's like the perfect explanation of this, because it is a gray zone, right? Like, so on the one hand, you can swing to one extreme of saying, well, I'm not gonna think about anybody else's needs. It's all about my needs and what I need. And that's probably not healthy. You can swing to the other end of the spectrum where you're saying, well, all I'm doing is worrying about everyone else. And I'm not even a factor in the equation. Those two extremes are both probably pretty unhealthy. The gray zone in between is huge. And so navigating that is really complicated. I'd love to hear from both of y'all your thoughts on it too.
Yeah, I'm interested, Brooke. I don't know if you feel comfortable, and if you don't, that's okay. When you talk about family, is that the family that you built, your family of origin? For me, I had a lot of expectations of my family of origin to show up and to be there, and knowing that for me, when I went back into that space, or when I go into that space, a lot of times it triggers a lot of those younger parts, because my family of origin, they're not doing the work that I'm doing on themselves, because they feel fine about where they're at, and that's okay for them. I'm not bashing them, but for me, it brought with it there was a lot of wounds that happened to me there. And so those wounds, those little wounds on different parts different parts of my memory, at different ages, was always triggered there. And I was listening to someone explain this last night of being able to, before going into a space where that happens again, of being able to get curious, and kind of now I kind of watch different people in my family of origin, and like some of them look just frenzied trying to get things together, and I'm like, oh, like, and it really doesn't have anything to do with me, even though like it triggers those parts inside. So I think for me, I had to set boundaries around that, and they don't understand that. They don't understand the boundaries. They feel offended by my boundaries, and that's going to happen. And it was really hard. I will say it was really hard in the beginning, and sometimes I gave in. Just because like it was so strong, and it was so difficult because I never set those boundaries before. And so for me, it just took a little bit at a time before I could build to where I'm at today with it. And this year was the first year I didn't feel guilty about not showing up for Thanksgiving, but it took, you know, I'm 50 years old, so it took a lot of years to get to that spot. And so I had to have some compassion for that, because there were those trauma bonds and those things that like adhered me to them. So Melanie.
Yeah, I think Brooks had clarified on your question, Angie, too, in the chat about family of origin who I have great relationships with, but who haven't done the work, which is exactly what you just touched on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate to this comment, and in different ways, but also in very similar ways. I think for me, it's been you know, assessing the why behind the trade-off. Sarah and I talked a bit about this kind of offline, but you know, like, what is the why behind like why I did those things, but also why I'm not willing to do those things anymore. And then I feel like that brings you, because those are the two extremes, right? The I'm gonna do all the things, or I'm not going to anything. But I feel like assessing that question within yourself, what is my why for these trade-offs, or why I don't want to do this year, or why I did that for years. I feel like that kind of zones it in to bring you to that sweet spot of that boundary or that thing that really frees you. Where, you know, again, the example I gave earlier, like I at one point was like, I'm not seeing my parents at all for Christmas. Like, I'm not doing it. Like, the last couple years didn't go great. But then, like, I feel like that would have been rough for me as well. It's like my daughter's first Christmas, you know, like, so I had to assess, okay, so maybe that's not the way to handle it, is to not see them at all. But how do I make it work for us, for, you know, what would be the sweet spot for me in this equation? And so I landed on, okay, they're not going to come here and enter into a different dynamic. We're going to go there a different weekend. It doesn't have to be on Christmas. You know, we can still celebrate. And actually, it's an extra celebration. So let's celebrate that. And we can have that kind of sacred space. And at first, it was hard for probably my mom and probably my dad too, in some ways, to say, like, we're not going to see our daughter and granddaughter on actual Christmas. But even, you know, empowering, like my mom told me the other day that she's going to spend time with her best friend of 40 years on Christmas now. And so it like me freeing myself then freed her, to do things a certain way, you know, to start new traditions for herself too, because it is not going to look the same way every year, especially as my family grows, you know. And so I think that's kind of a way to navigate it, is to kind of ask the why, for yourself, as to why this is unhealthy, or why I'm not going to do this anymore, or why I want to do this. And then it kind of can zone you in that gray area of like what boundary to set or what's going to happen, to fill yourself, but also to not completely say I'm not going and I'm not doing it, and then hurting people in the process, you know. And
Well,
sometimes
also,
inevitably, Angie, it's going to hurt people, right? Like you
yeah,
talked
it
about.
will.
Even if you assess all the situation and try to do the best for yourself and for others, it's still going to hurt people. But I think if you just are introspective and intentional, like we talked about earlier, it can bring you to a beautiful freedom in whatever decision you make.
Yeah, and also taking in with you, Brooke, some coping skills that you have built and things that you may have worked on. Like if you are leaning into your body and noticing, wait a second, I'm starting to feel really anxious right now. Being able to give yourself permission just to say, hey, I need some fresh air, or I need to step out and take a walk, or have some time, because you're not asking anybody else to change what they're doing. You are able to recognize that this is what my body and this is what I need in this space. And sometimes they won't understand. I know I have a parent that doesn't understand and is like, oh, what are you, mad? Like, and it's like, no, I'm not upset with you. I just need some time I just need a few minutes to like get some fresh air. I noticed that I was just feeling anxious, and you know, so I have a parent that's really reactive, and that will continue to like, and I'm like, well, I understand you don't understand, but this is what I need. So I'm going to take 10 minutes and I'll be back, you know, carry on. Right.
Yeah. And Wendy had a great point in the chat too, that like, kind of like I talked about with my mom, like creating new things. So like she didn't get to see this family member because she didn't go to this family event, but then they got to have some one-on-one time. And how cool is that? Like that maybe wouldn't have happened if, you know, she did go to that event because they saw each other there, you know. And so creating that beautiful kind of new experience, for those around you. And, you know, I've been able to do that with my in-laws and my family here. You know, we're doing life together here all the time. And so it's nice to be able to stay here on Christmas instead of having to like navigate leaving what I've built here, you know. So yeah. Sarah, go ahead.
I was just going to add too, I noticed that Brooks had sort of elaborated from the original comment and saying like, there can kind of be this disconnect, struggling where you sort of know it logically in your brain, but then when you kind of try to work out the details or the logistics of this in real life, it's one thing to sort of say, oh, well, I know that, you know, expectations or boundaries or traditions, like whatever sort of the right thing to say is, but then when you rubber meets the road and you have to actually do it in real life, sometimes it can look a little different. And I think It's one thing to say, okay, well, the holidays come with a lot of pressure, so you can free yourself from that pressure. But then when you really, again, when you really walk that out in real life, what does that mean? Like, what would it actually look like to have the freedom to make the holiday whatever you want it to be? That's almost as overwhelming in a different way, because all of a sudden you're opening the door to limitless ideas of what it could be. And so I think that navigating that of, so how do I take maybe one step? Maybe I'm not going to completely rescript the whole holiday, but how do I navigate maybe one small element of change, or how do I pick one thing to communicate with my family about? Because maybe we're not going to tackle A, B, and C, but maybe there's this one nuanced piece that we could start to talk about, or start to think about how that could look a little bit different. There can be a lot of pressure in trying to say, well, now all of a sudden I'm just supposed to create new traditions or make it what I want it to be. Maybe I don't even know what I want it to be. Maybe when I just sit with myself alone and get real about that, that's a real big question that's very layered and complicated.
Yeah.
That's really good. And I feel like for me, it was like geographical. It started very small. It's like, where am I physically going to be? So like going back to New Hampshire for a while early on was hard once I got a taste of being away from New Hampshire, because New Hampshire is where my abuse happened. And so although I didn't realize like while I was in it that was something that was hard for me because I was just there all the time, I when I was away from it and living by the ocean, and like I didn't want to leave here, I didn't want to go back into that arena. And so, but then in years past, it's like when I go to New Hampshire now, I feel joy, because I've kind of rewritten that geographical space in a lot of ways and set boundaries around it of when I go there, And so I think it, for me, it just started with, okay, geographically, where is the best place for me to be? And then it became more of like, what boundaries do I need to set? And, it got more in depth there, but literally for the first couple of years of kind of practicing this and doing this on my healing journey, it was like, okay, physically, where do I need to be? In New Hampshire or on Cape Cod, and so like it was only that, and so that was like the small step that then led to these other things.
Yeah, and giving yourself the permission and the understanding it's going to look messy, right? It doesn't have like it yes, you may have go in with a plan. There are many times I went in with a plan in my head, like I need this, and wasn't able to for whatever reason. Maybe I froze up, or maybe those things came back up where or maybe I was reactive and my 15-year-old self came out and got pretty sassy back, and being able to give understanding and compassion, so you're not gonna get it right. Like your heart is like, I know that things need to change. I know that like there needs to be this balance, and that's the beginning of the journey. And like you all have said, like it's just like that trial and error. And then also that time of tending to your own heart afterwards, if you feel like that didn't go how I wanted it to go, and having support around you that you can maybe even debrief with, whether that's a therapist or whether that is other people that know you, that you feel comfortable with, being able to debrief. And I have people in my life that I trust, that I role play with them now, which sounds really like, why would you do that? But knowing my family of origin, I have some people that are really strong personality. I know, like, you can't tell, like, I'm a strong personality too. And so it helps me to like role play, because when I get in that situation, I feel very overpowered because I'm feeling like that younger version of me. And so it looks a lot of different ways. And we can put some resources. We can put some resources too, and some things that we've found helpful. We can attach that to this as well. I think I might have misspoke, but we'll ask Becky in a little bit.
Yeah.
So.
We can compile a list and it can be sent out either way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Melanie, I love just how like pragmatic, how like practical that decision making was for you. And I think it kind of shines a really beautiful light on there was a therapist I knew a long time ago who he would always say, you know, before you go trying to change all the things, try just standing in one place and changing one thing. And I feel like that was kind of where you were with that decision, where, you know, like the idea of how do I script an entirely new holiday tradition and what is this all like? That's way too much change to try to tackle all at once. It's complicated, right? But to stand in one place and say, I'm going to make this one decision about this one piece of a very complicated puzzle. And that piece being geography. Like, okay, that was very practical. That was a very concrete way to have one step. And then from that one step, many other steps obviously were able to take shape. I think sometimes when we have a plate or a menu of options where there are so many different directions you could go, even just standing in one place and choosing one thing can feel like, well, what's the point of that? But it's actually hugely important, because making that one step then allows you to put yourself on a trajectory towards making other decisions and putting other puzzle pieces into place.
Yeah. It's the building, right? Or the rebuilding, or the starting from scratch, like however you word that. But yeah, for yourself.
And I'm so bad about that, y'all. Like, it's so natural to think, well, I don't want to take step one until I know what the finished product is going to look like. I want to know the full beauty of how it's going to turn out, and then I'll take the steps. But like, y'all, that is not how it works. Not in real life, right? We take those messy steps, and then we realize we took 3 steps down the wrong path, and we have to backtrack and then go up a different path. And then like, it spirals and it looks like this. It's never just this linear process, A to B to C.
Yeah, it's that messy. Someone the other day, like they looking at their life, they are the tangled light, the tangled Christmas lights. Like, yeah, that's what
expectation
this
versus reality. Yeah, you're like, those lights looked nice last year, and now they're a tangled mess in a box. Yep.
Right.
So. Yeah.
So Brooke, I hope we answered a little bit of your question, and if we didn't, let us know, and we can, Becky said we can send resources out too, so that's good. So
that's helpful. Thank you. That's awesome.
So we have just about 10 minutes left. I don't know if you guys have a direction you want to go, or you want to kind of like leave people with something that you want them to know moving forward. You know, however you all want to do it, we can. Like last thoughts. I don't know.
To like wrap it up, I think just reiterating that multiple things can coexist, and I think sometimes we put the pressure on ourselves that like, okay, if I feel joyful today at this event, then I have to be joyful the rest of the holiday season. You know, and I think it's so important to give ourselves the freedom to say like, you know, and to grieve things. Like, you know, there is part of me that does grieve, although I feel great about my decision, I do still grieve like being with, especially my dad's side of the family, with my cousins, and I still see them still celebrating all together. And I do miss that, and like being close with my cousins. My cousins were like sisters to me growing up. And again, it's not because I made a decision because anything bad happened with them. It just like doesn't fit into my like new traditions, you know, to go back to New Hampshire just for that couple hours with them that I used to spend, you know. And so like, it's okay to grieve those things, but also feel joy about your new process or excitement, but also to grieve after that, you know, and in the midst of that and beyond that and before that. And so I think it can all coexist, which can be hard because it can feel like a gray area where you're like, I just want to, like Sarah was talking about, I just want to be in the joy of it all, you know. But then there's also days where you're like, I don't care about the joy of it all. I just want to sit in my grief right now, you know. So I think it can be tricky to be in the gray area, but there is times where, you know, we hope that you can feel the fullness of the joy, but also honor the depth of the grief. And so all of those things can coexist. And I just want to give all of us the freedom to have that. So that would be my closing thoughts.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Melanie. And I just want to leave everybody with the just the thought and the idea that whatever you decide for yourself is okay. Right? You're doing the best that you can. And really that radical self-compassion, especially around this time of year with moving through it, and with maybe for the first time, I remember that first year that I decided that I wasn't going to just jump into the expectations of how everything looked, and how conflicted I felt inside, and how I was carrying all of this almost this tension and this pull back and forth of, why do I always have to be the one to rock the boat and cause the trouble, right? And then looking back and being really proud of that version of myself, because I knew how hard and how difficult that was for her. And knowing, like it's been said before, it's not a linear journey. It's gonna be, you're gonna have the ups and downs, and you're gonna have, but just recognizing and honoring yourself for the journey that you are on, and giving that that time, that if after you and you're reflecting back, if after you went to that holiday party or family event, and afterwards, like, sometimes you need a day or so, or 2 or 3, to like recuperate from that, not feeling bad about that. There were days that I spent one Christmas like in bed the whole day, and I felt so bad for that, because I have kids and I have like, but my family here that I've built understood, like, this is because I spent the day before with a whole bunch of family, right? And my body was just responding. And so just giving that self-reflection and self-compassion to yourself, and celebrating that the journey you're on is the journey you're on, and it doesn't have to look like everybody else's journey. And also permission to reach out if you need that extra support, and that extra just space. I've had friends call me during the holidays, and they just want me to sit on the phone with them and not say anything, just sit with them for 10-15 minutes. That's what they need. They need somebody on the other line that they know, like, and that's okay too. So it can really look just fluid to what you need. So
Yeah, you guys both did awesome summaries, and took a lot of the points that I was thinking about. I think it's a little bit ironic that we're talking about the holiday season, and I think that season is where I'm going to kind of close with for myself, is the idea that this is a season. And so whether you are walking through a season of joy, a season of grief, a season of anger, this is one piece of a very big and beautiful and long journey that will evolve and change. So the holiday season may represent different things to different people. It also may represent different things within you at different points in minute to minute, day to day, activity to activity, and allowing the space to hold all the complexities of what that is. So, if you're in a season of grief, to feel it, to allow it to be what it is, to be real with yourself. And if you have family or friends or a therapist or people that you can be real with, to share with them kind of what this is about for you, what it represents for you, why it's feeling tough, to not feel a need to put on a facade, but to allow it to just be real, that that maybe you're struggling, or that maybe stuff isn't feeling as jolly or joyful as the season dictates that it's supposed to. And then also allowing that season to shift, and knowing that you do not have to stay trapped in that season. You do not have to be a slave to that. It can be what it is in that moment, and then it can shift. And like I said, for some people that might shift moment to moment. For some, it may be, as Angie said, a deeper phase that you move into through Thanksgiving, through Christmas, Hanukkah, through whatever secular or religious holidays that you're moving through in the season. That this may be a month or two that feel pretty different for you, feel pretty heavy for you. That's okay. Remembering that it's a season, and that January is coming. There's a time for shifting that narrative. And I think the three of us are going to come back in January and talk about that a little bit too. A little bit of a rebirth and a reboot. So we'll kind of forecast that a little bit. But we've got a few intense weeks ahead of us, and whether it's intense joy or sadness or anger or any emotion, to allow yourself to just feel it and be in it and be real with whatever you need.
Yeah, or intense excitement and joy and wonderment, allowing, because sometimes that can even feel uncomfortable. Like, oh wow, like I'm feeling that joyfulness and I'm feeling that excitement. I have my oldest kid loves, I mean, when I see like this kid is like all out for like from Thanksgiving, Chris, and she's 28 now, and it's like it's kind of overwhelming to me. And she's like the introvert of the family, but she wants to get the tree. She's excited to get the tree. And like, and I love watching that in her. Like, I don't ever want to like stifle that. And so it's a beautiful thing to see that part too. And so, like Sarah said, and Melanie said, like, whatever you're going through, like giving space to that and honoring that. Right? It's a
For me,
season.
seeing it through my daughter's eyes this year, that's a new excitement that maybe I haven't felt for years. Even though I've been joyful, it's like a different kind of excitement, seeing it through her eyes, seeing a lot of things for the first time. So
yeah, because she's seeing those things for the first time, and like their little eyes get big, and so yeah, and there's healing in that too. There's healing in seeing those things in those spaces too.
Seeing them in a new light,
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you all so much for a great discussion today, and for everybody who chimed in the chat. Just a great discussion. And so it's just so healing and helpful, I think, to just be able to talk about this kind of stuff. I mean, I think just being able to talk about it in itself kind of helps just to navigate, like Sarah said, whatever season you're in and whatever you're feeling. So thank you all so much. I am going to stop the recording now.